The signal was not meant to be found. It wasn't a call for help, not exactly. It was a tombstone screaming into the void, a legacy etched into radiation, pulsing once every 100 years like the breath of a dying god. 10,000 years it waited, and for 10,000 years the galaxy ignored it, until humans came. The signal wasn't elegant. It was brute force. Gamma spikes, subspace bursts, code packets that shattered decoding protocols. The automated filters of elder races dismissed it as background noise, flickering remnants of a long-dead civilization, not worth revisiting. But humanity was still new to the stars, still curious, still naive. And they listened. A relay on the edge of the Perseus fringe caught the anomaly. No known frequency, no repeatable structure. But the signature bore signs of artificial origin and urgency. Unlike the great powers who passed judgment in microseconds, Earth sent it to the Exploration Authority. And Earth did what no one else had done in 10 millennia. They answered. The Vigilant Spark, a long-range scout ship retrofitted for deep anomalies, launched within 21 hours. 5 crew, limited AI, enough supplies for 90 days. The mission brief was simple. Find the source. Make contact. Record. Return. It was madness. The coordinates pointed toward an irradiated sector called the Chiral Expanse. Lightless, forgotten, believed sterilized by ancient wars. No known colonies. No traffic. No reason to go there except the whisper of something that should not be whispering at all. The journey took 16 days. They passed wreckage. Silent hulks drifting like bones through the dark. No heat signatures. No survivors. Only corpses frozen in the vacuum, armor rusted by time and silence. The Vigilant Spark logged 39 derelicts in the final stretch, none human. All of them ancient. All destroyed by something that didn't leave a return address. Then the ship reached the source. A dead world, tidally locked, orbiting a dwarf star barely above collapse. No atmosphere. Surface cracked like dried blood. At the equator, buried beneath obsidian ridges. The signal pulsed. Stronger. Clearer. No longer a cry. A command. The crew debated extraction. Protocol advised caution. But the captain, a former engineer with more scars and ranks, made the call. They descended. The entrance was sealed beneath a vault of alloy no human database could identify. It responded to proximity. Not touch. Not sound. It opened like a sigh. The team descended into blackness. The interior was preserved. Not ruins. Not wreckage. But design, symmetry, geometry, power. Lights activated as they moved, not from motion, but from awareness. The place was awake. Not alive, but watching, measuring. They reached the heart of the structure, a chamber of towering pillars and circular platforms, suspended in gravitational null. In the center, inside a containment sphere of flickering energy, was the origin of the signal. A throne, a corpse, and a machine. The corpse wore robes made of molecular filaments, still regenerating themselves. The skin, gray, stretched thin over bones, had not decayed. The face, elongated and cruel, stared upward in frozen agony. It hadn't died of age. It had died mid-broadcast. The machine wrapped around it like a cradle. Part biological, part psychic conduit, part weapon. It wasn't broadcasting anymore. It was waiting. As the crew approached, their minds buzzed, not with sound, but pressure, thoughts. Alien layered, ancient. The AI on board shut itself off, voluntarily. One of the crew collapsed, blood streaming from her nose. The captain made the second call. They activated the machine. The corpse blinked. Not metaphorically. Its eyes, covered in glass-like lids, opened, and it screamed. No sound came, but the lights shattered. The chamber convulsed. Gravity failed. The air became thick, impossible. The crew collapsed. And then, silence. The crew awoke moments later. Time was meaningless. The corpse was gone. In its place, on the floor, a figure sat. Alive. Weak. Diminished. But aware. It looked at them with eyes blacker than any spectrum could define. It spoke in thoughts, not words. And the thoughts came as a storm. It was the last of the Ellerin High Sovereigns, a race older than stars, long believed extinct, architects of technologies that terrified their own creators. They once ruled half the galaxy not by war, but by awe. Civilization surrendered to them willingly. Their empire collapsed in a single century, and no one remembered why. The being, too old to be called a man, did not speak its name. It had discarded it after watching its children turn to ash. What it told the crew was this. It had sent a signal to warn, not to save. The enemy that destroyed them was not a species, not a weapon. It was something deeper, older than even they, something that made itself forgotten, something that whispered ideas until empires collapsed under the weight of their own logic. They had no name for it, only a symbol, a mirror with no reflection. The humans asked why it responded now, after all this time. The answer was not comforting, because it heard something familiar in them. The old one asked where the others were, the Auric Varn, the Veshin, the Saravel, races who had once stood beside the Ellerin as brothers. The crew explained. They still existed, but they had ignored the signal. The old one laughed, and the chamber wept with dust. They chose silence. It said, over memory, and in silence, the enemy waits. The humans asked if he was a threat. He said he wasn't anything anymore. They asked what he needed. He said, I need time, and fools who still believe in fire. They gave him both. The ship's AI rebooted itself, damaged but stable. It refused to process any sensory data from the alien, called it a cognitive hazard. The captain accepted it. The decision was made they would bring the survivor back to Earth. It wasn't for science, or politics, or diplomacy. It was because no one else had come. As they lifted off the planet, the signal died, but something else replaced it. Something that had been listening, now listening closer. In the darkness between stars, something moved. The last of the Ellerin closed his eyes and whispered in thought, You've invited it. Now you must teach it fear. The vigilant spark turned away from the dead world where the passage of the galaxy had buried and forgotten. The crew said nothing as they entered deep jump range. The silence wasn't respect. It was instinct. Something had shifted in the universe the moment they took the Ellerin aboard. Even the air felt different. His name was never spoken. The crew called him the Sovereign, not out of reverence, but necessity. What few readings the ship managed to gather on him were useless. Biological scans failed. Energy readings bent into negative integers. Even light avoided him. When the ship's onboard AI tried to define his presence, it refused. Not failed, refused. The Sovereign wasn't part of any known taxonomy. It was like trying to measure a black hole with a thermometer. He didn't move much. He sat near the gravity core, eyes closed, breathing once every few minutes. But when he did open his eyes, the temperature dropped. One of the crew swore. They heard whispers that weren't in any language. The medic, hardened from 3 frontier tours, started sleeping with a sidearm. No one questioned it. 3 days into the return trip, the first dream hit. The pilot saw his dead brother in the mess hall. Not a hallucination. A perfect rendering, speech patterns, smells, voice. But the brother whispered things he never knew. Secrets buried so deep, the pilot vomited after waking. The Sovereign watched him for 3 minutes afterward. Silent. Day 5. The engineer locked herself in the maintenance bay and refused to speak. Not out of fear. Out of shame. She claimed the ship spoke to her. Told her she'd fail. That Earth would burn. That the crew were already dead. They just hadn't noticed yet. When they dragged her out, her arms were covered in strange symbols. Not carved. Not inked. Bruised into the skin by something she couldn't describe. The captain confronted the Sovereign. What's happening to my people? The Ellerin opened his eyes. They are being noticed. He explained, not kindly, that the enemy, the thing that destroyed his empire, didn't use weapons. It used attention, curiosity. It whispered into minds and built cities of delusion. It turned empathy into infection. The more one tried to understand it, the more it understood you. It wasn't watching the crew because they found the signal. It was watching because they brought him back. It had forgotten him. Now it remembered. The captain asked why it hadn't followed him sooner. The Sovereign smiled, barely, because it was sure I had nothing left. It was wrong. They tried to isolate the ship systems. Firewalls, redundant backups, manual controls. Nothing mattered. The Whisper didn't hack. It infected. The navigator started charting routes to stars that didn't exist. One crewman erased his own memories, overwriting them with poetry he'd never learned. On day 8, the cook opened an airlock and walked out, smiling. The AI sealed itself off completely. Final log. This isn't data. It's ritual. The Sovereign began carving, not with tools, but with his mind. The ship's walls changed, subtly, then obviously. Symbols etched themselves into the floor. Not markings, but rules. Counter-curses, memory anchors, psychic tripwires. The crew protested, then stopped, because the hallucinations faded. The voices dulled. The Sovereign was shielding them, not out of kindness, but strategy. They are drawn to minds that search for meaning, he said. You humans are the hungriest species I've ever seen. That makes you vulnerable and useful. The captain asked what it was. The Sovereign didn't answer with a name. He showed them a memory. It wasn't a vision. It was shared consciousness, raw, painful, and immediate. They saw a world made of glass, shattering as people forgot how to breathe. They saw fleets consume each other in silence, convinced their comrades were imposters. They saw a sun rewritten into a shape that made no sense, until the star itself tore apart in shame. They saw a library older than the galaxy scream as the knowledge inside realized it should not exist. And they saw the Ellerin fall, not in battle, but in surrender, because the Whisper never threatened. It convinced them they deserved extinction. The Sovereign, last of his kind, had sealed himself beneath a tomb not to escape, but to hide the map, a memory of resistance, the coordinates of defiance. He was the last torchbearer, buried so the dark would forget the light. And now, because of humans, the dark remembered. On day 11, the first external contact was made. An unknown ship appeared on intercept course. No heat signature, no drive trails, just appeared. The spark scanners failed. The Sovereign ordered weapons ready. The captain reminded him, the spark wasn't a warship. I know, said the Sovereign, but war doesn't need ships. It needs anchors. The enemy didn't hail them, didn't threaten. Instead, it broadcast a message in pure emotion: shame, despair, affection, surrender. One of the crew, youngest, barely 20, began weeping and asked to be allowed aboard the enemy vessel. She forgives us, he whispered. She understands. We can rest now. The captain sedated him. The Sovereign walked past and placed 2 fingers on the boy's forehead. The weeping stopped. The boy died quietly, without pain. He was already gone, the Sovereign said. You just hadn't noticed yet. They jumped again, and again. The enemy followed, not in ships, but in memory. They started finding rewritten logs, messages they never sent, conversations they never had. Entire conversations with Earth Command, flawless, authenticated, time-stamped, except no signal had been sent. The AI reemerged for 4 seconds. It said, "Stop listening." Then it self-deleted. The Sovereign taught the crew how to forget on purpose, which emotions to sever, which questions to never ask. He told them which words to avoid. He gave them silence as a weapon. By day 17, the spark was barely functional. Not from damage, but wait. The psychic pressure was like atmosphere thickening around a planet. Earth was 3 jumps away. The crew was 2 members down. The rest barely spoke. The Sovereign stood in the central chamber and began assembling something. It looked like nothing, but the moment it was completed, the enemy blinked. They felt it, not in scanners. In blood. The Whisper stopped. It wasn't gone. It was afraid. The captain watched the Sovereign, trembling. What did you build? He looked at her with eyes that had seen galaxies die. A question it cannot answer. The next jump would bring them home. The Sovereign warned, Earth must not welcome him. They must prepare, because now the galaxy remembered him, and so did the thing that had tried to erase him. It wouldn't let the humans go unanswered. But the Sovereign saw something in the crew, in the madness they'd endured. Not resilience, not strength, but disobedience. The others obeyed the Whisperer, he said. You defy your own gods. That makes you dangerous. The final jump aligned. The spark, cracked and bleeding, aimed itself toward Earth. The Sovereign sat in silence. He didn't ask for mercy. He asked for a name. The captain gave him hers. He whispered it once, then said, "Then let your kind be remembered for what comes next." They jumped. The galaxy blinked. And in the ruins of forgotten empires, something ancient snarled. The council called for silence. Across the core worlds, all discussion of XR 4107 was locked behind military-class encryption. Media feeds were scrubbed. Diplomatic cables redacted. The official stance, no confirmation, no denial. But containment failed before it began, because the galaxy no longer believed the council, and the Shannons no longer cared what it believed. By year 24, Ashana's orbit hosted its first shipyard. Spanning 9 kilometers, a skeletal ring grown from alloy humans hadn't known how to synthesize 10 years earlier. Not mined, not imported, cultivated, biometal, seeded with instructions from machines they still didn't fully understand. It obeyed, thought more than tools. The first ship launched silently, not a warship, a research vessel, but it left orbit under its own power, without clearance, without registry. It jumped 5 systems away and returned in 12 hours. Not possible, but the crew was alive, and they had mapped a corridor in subspace unknown to the rest of the galaxy. They called it the Wound, a scar in reality. Unstable, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But real, and theirs. The interface theorized the Wound wasn't natural. It was a byproduct of whatever had once lived on Ashana, what they now refer to only as the Architects. What remained of their empire had been buried. Ashana wasn't dead. It was sleeping, and now it was awake. The interface didn't act alone. Their research was overseen by the Ashanan Council, no longer a survival committee, but a governing body of engineers, warriors, builders, and linguists. No politicians. No figureheads. Every member had survived the collapse years. Everyone had bled. They voted unanimously. Ashana would not hide. They would not beg for re-entry into the galactic community. They would send a message, not a defiance, but a fact. We exist. The message was delivered not with words, but with technology. Ships with no cockpits. Weapons that sang. Engines that folded light. No threats were issued. No demands were made. Just coordinates. One system. Once every lunar cycle. The invitation was open. Only one envoy accepted. A Veshin diplomat named Irelex, disavowed by her own government for questioning the exile. She arrived alone. No guards. No surveillance. She brought no translators. She was welcomed into Sanctum with open arms. No weapons. No probes. No suspicion, because the Ashannans no longer feared visitors. Irelex met with the council beneath the dome of roots, an oxygen garden grown around a fusion core. She was offered water that glowed, fruit that grew in vacuum, a chair that shaped itself to her spine. She asked them, how? The oldest among them, born on Earth, answered, we stopped trying to be what you feared. We became what we needed. Irelex stayed 3 days. On the 4th, she wept. Quietly, she said, we left you to die. The answer came like stone, and you succeeded. That night, Irelex walked alone to the archive chamber, one of the alien vaults uncovered in the early years. She asked to see the Wound. They showed her, not just the coordinates. The map, what they found inside wasn't a weapon or a power source. It was a story, not told in words, but in structure. Symbols layered into architecture, memory, and silence. The interface believed it was the last memory of the Architects, something so dangerous it had to be buried inside a world no one would visit, until the Council sent humans. Irelex understood. This exile was never a punishment, she whispered. It was inheritance. The interface said nothing, because they already knew. When Irelex returned to Council space, her message caused a fracture. Her footage was real. her voice unbroken, her words clear. They are not what we exiled. They are not what we feared. They are what comes next. The council panicked. The Kalan deployed a blockade fleet to the outer edge of Ashana's system. 30 ships, full combat array, no warnings. Ashana responded with one. It didn't fire. It sang. The sound, inaudible to most, disrupted every targeting system in the Kalan fleet. Not a virus, not jamming. Dissonance. The ships lost orientation. Power conduits reversed. Gravitic stabilizers pulsed out of sync. They fled after 20 minutes of induced nausea and non-lethal hallucination. No casualties. No destruction. Just humiliation. The council threatened war. Ashana didn't reply. They didn't need to, because by now, thousands across the galaxy had seen the signals. Refugees, traitors, exiled from other species, those deemed unstable by the council's definition of civilization. They came. One ship, then 3, then entire flotillas of wanderers. Ashana didn't reject them. They weren't generous. They weren't soft, but they opened the gates. Those who came were given rules. Work, purpose, air, and they adapted. The children born to Cerebral hybrids and Kalan outcasts in the Underdomes weren't just different. They were Ashanan, and the planet grew. More than domes, more than cities. Identity, a place that existed not because it was allowed, but because it refused to disappear. The galaxy watched. Some feared, some admired, but all listened, because in the silence of exile, the humans had built not revenge, not empire, resonance, and that resonance echoed across every system where someone had ever been discarded. Ashana's orbit was no longer empty. It shimmered with life. Modular docks, signal towers, organic scaffolding grown into hardened frames. Lights moved between vessels like nervous stars. The planet that was once bare stone now glowed with veins of movement, purpose, civilization. But the Ashanans still remembered the exile. They remembered it not with rage, but clarity. So when the council announced its formal expeditionary delegation, a diplomatic envoy, they said, not an inspection. Ashana accepted. They didn't fear visitors. They feared forgetting. The delegation arrived in gold-trimmed carriers, 10 ships wide, bearing symbols of unity and peace. It was theater. The Ashanan saw it clearly. The ships bristled with weapons, shielded with stealth coatings, escorted by silent drones cloaked behind formal titles. They were greeted with silence, and then they were taken underground. The delegation expected a summit table. They found a hall of stone, not built, but grown, from memory, etched with the voices of the first 5,000, their names, their deaths, their survival. No guard stood watch, because Ashana didn't need one. They were the guard. The Ashanan Council met the delegates in person. No holograms, no bodyguards, no interpreters. The chair was a woman born underground. She had never seen Earth. Her skin carried the scars of vacuum exposure. Her voice the grit of filtered air. Her presence said everything. The council spokesman began with practiced humility. You've achieved remarkable things, against overwhelming odds. We acknowledge your strength. She didn't flinch. You acknowledged our death sentence. We turned it into soil. He shifted uncomfortably. We seek to understand how far your society has diverged. She corrected him. Evolved, not diverged. We move away. We move beyond. They discussed integration. She declined. They offered reparations. She declined. They warned of fear growing across the spiral arms. She smiled. You fear what you cannot overwrite. The spokesman lost patience. What do you want? The council chair stepped aside, and the walls lit up, not with text, not with weapons, with memories, images, recordings, voices, the first weeks, the starvation, the frostbite, the burials in dust, the final breath of the boy who gave his oxygen to his sister, the last soldier to hold the perimeter as the dome cracked and the vacuum screamed, and the first child to take her first step under an artificial sky and laugh. It played silently for 7 minutes. Then the lights dimmed. The council chair answered, "We want you to remember. The delegation was quiet when they left, but they didn't all return. 5 members requested asylum. 2 stayed, and 1 never boarded his ship again. He was found in the Underdomes, teaching children to read in 6 dialects. He said they listened better than his own species ever had. Back in council space, panic followed, not because of war, but because of influence. Ashina tech began to appear off-world, quietly, unofficially, leaked, traded, revered, not for its power, but for its simplicity, for how it responded to thought, not rank, to intent, not command. Ashinan language began spreading in low bands and coded transmissions, not propaganda. Poetry, philosophy, questions. Who decides worth? Why is silence called peace when it's forced? What grows in exile if we water it with memory? No answers were demanded, only echoes. The council banned all trade with Ashana. The sanctions were ignored, because trade had already begun, not in cargo. In culture, Ashana didn't rise as a military force. It rose as a mirror. The Kalan lost their grip on 2 colonies. The Veshin parliament dissolved after half its young population walked out wearing woven metal from the Ashanan style. The Saraval declared their neutrality and immediately received an Ashanan seed core to stabilize their crumbling moons. Ashana didn't ask for allies, but it made the galaxy choose. And the choice became clear. You could cling to the old empire of rules and exile, or step into the world the exiles made. The final broadcast came in year 30. No preamble, no demand, just the voice of a child, speaking calmly, clearly, in a frequency no system could block. We were told to die quietly. We refused. She paused, and then, the last words of the story that began in silence. We are not survivors. We are the beginning